My name is Delia Marsh. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the night I placed a small white index card on my mother-in-law's dinner table and watched 39 years of her marriage begin to come apart. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't give a speech. I set down a piece of paper the size of a playing card, said 4 words, and picked up my daughter's coat. What happened in the 60 seconds after that, the sound Roberta made, the way Gerald went completely still in the kitchen doorway, the way my husband said my name like a question he already knew the answer to, that is what I have been sitting with ever since. Not with pride, exactly. Not with regret, exactly. With something more complicated than either of those things. But to understand why I did it, you have to understand where I came from. Because this story doesn't start at that dinner table. It starts in a kitchen in East Knoxville, Tennessee, when I was 11 years old, watching my mother smile at leftovers in a paper bag. Before I go any further, if you just found this channel, hit subscribe and like this video. It helps more than you know, and this story is going somewhere. I want you to be here for all of it. And while you're down there in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's on the other end of this. Okay, let me take you back to the beginning. My mother cleaned houses, not as a career pivot or a side hustle, as the thing she did, from the time I was 6 until I was 22 to keep us fed and the lights on. She was good at it, and she was grateful for it, and that combination, being good at something and being grateful when you should have been paid better, is something I absorbed so deeply that I spent the first decade of my adult life excavating it out of myself one layer at a time. We lived in East Knoxville in a house that was clean but tired. My dad worked a plant line and came home quiet. My older brother left for the army at 18 with a kind of relief that I understood even then. My younger sister became a nurse. And me, I was the one in the middle, quiet and watching. The one who sat at the kitchen table doing homework while my mother cooked dinner from whatever she had left in the pantry, making it stretch with the particular creativity of someone who has no other options. She cooked every single night. Not because she loved it, though I think she did, a little, but because a home-cooked meal was the one thing she could give us that cost almost nothing and meant almost everything. And she was good at it. Really good. The kind of good that doesn't come from cooking classes or cookbooks. It comes from necessity, from repetition, from knowing your food the way you know the back roads of your neighborhood. I learned to cook at that stove. I learned to feel the difference between chicken that's done and chicken that needs 2 more minutes. I learned to make bread because bread is cheap and warm, and it fills a kitchen with something that smells like safety. I didn't think of it as a skill. It was just something I knew how to do. The way I knew how to get home from school using the short way that nobody else used. When I was 11, my mother came home one Thursday from one of her regular houses, a family in the west part of the city, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are watered on a timer, and she had a paper bag in her hands. Inside were leftovers from a dinner party the family had thrown the night before. Fine cheeses, sliced cured meats, a half-eaten tart with some kind of cream filling. The kind of food I had never seen in our house. And she set that bag on the kitchen table like it was treasure. She was smiling. Genuinely smiling. And I remember sitting there, 10 feet away from her, and feeling something move through me that I did not have a name for yet. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was something more like a decision, forming in my chest without any words attached to it. That I would never smile at scraps. That I would never be grateful for the leftovers from someone else's table. That sounds like a hard thing to think about your own mother. I know that. But I was 11 and I loved her, and what I was really feeling was something I couldn't say out loud. That she deserved more than she was getting, and that the woman who left that bag on the counter for the help like a gratuity, that woman would never know that. And never think about it. I think about it every single day. I got a scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Partial. Not full. I wasn't that kind of lucky. I took out loans for the rest, worked 20 hours a week at a copy shop on the edge of campus, and graduated with $22,000 in debt that I paid off over the next 6 years by not buying things I wanted and not apologizing for being careful with money. Nobody in my family had done it before me. My mom cried at graduation. My dad took 3 photographs on a disposable camera, and ran out of film before the actual moment I walked across the stage, which is the most perfectly my family thing that has ever happened. I moved to Nashville after graduation, got a job at a small marketing agency, entry level, badly paid, and exactly where I needed to be. I worked. I got better. I got promoted, then promoted again. And eventually, I became the person in the room who speaks last and most clearly, which is a skill I learned not from any job, but from years of being underestimated and deciding to use it rather than fight it. I want you to understand something about who I was before I met the Whitfields. I was not a woman who needed rescuing. I was not a woman who needed their approval. I had built my own life with my own hands, and I knew the weight of it, the way you know something you've carried yourself without help. And if you have ever worked that hard and still been made to feel like you came up short, like the life you built wasn't quite the right kind of life, wasn't quite the right kind of impressive, then I think you already understand something about what it felt like to sit at that dinner table. If that's where you are right now, or where you've been, hit like on this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because I promise you, what comes next is the part nobody talks about. I met Connor Whitfield at a professional networking event in Nashville when I was 27. He was 30, tall, easy in a room, the kind of man who can talk to anyone without performing it. We dated for 2 years and then got married in a small ceremony that his mother referred to as intimate, in a tone that suggested she had hoped for something else. Roberta Whitfield. I want to be precise about her because she is not a villain in the way that word usually gets used. She is not cruel in the way that announces itself. She is cruel in the way that weather is cruel, through accumulated pressure, through the slow attrition of small moments that don't seem like much on their own, but that, over 6 years, add up to a specific kind of exhaustion. She had a talent. And I mean this genuinely, it takes a certain precision. For delivering a diminishment inside a smile. For saying something that lands like a compliment until you're alone in the car on the way home and you replay it and you understand what it actually was. Paulette, Connor's younger sister, saw it. I knew she saw it because she never laughed at those moments the way Connor did. She would pick up her water glass, or look at her fork, or find something across the room that suddenly needed her attention. We had never talked about it directly, but we understood each other the way people understand each other when they have been in the same room long enough. Gerald Whitfield was a different kind of problem. Gerald was the absence at the center of the thing. A large, warm, professionally successful man who had arranged his life so that nothing uncomfortable ever reached him directly. He let Roberta run the social weather of every room they shared, and he participated in the results without ever driving them. He opened doors, he told good stories, he refilled your wine glass before you asked. 4 months before that Thursday dinner, I had been at their house helping Gerald troubleshoot his email on his tablet. He'd wandered away to answer the landline. Yes, they still have a landline. And I was waiting, and his screen lit up with a message. It was brief, and the name at the top was Sandra Pruitt. I didn't read further. I didn't need to. The context was plain enough in 2 lines. I set the tablet down on the coffee table with the screen facing up. I waited for him to come back, and when he did, I watched him see the screen and watch something move through his face. Just for a second, just a flicker. And then he picked up the tablet and turned it over and said, "Sorry about that, what were we doing?" I wrote the name down that night, after Connor was asleep. Sandra Pruitt. On a small white index card, with a phone number I found in 11 minutes because Gerald had not been particularly careful about any of this. I put the card in the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't know why. I told myself I was never going to use it. I told myself it wasn't my marriage to blow up. I told myself a lot of things over 4 months. And then Roberta Whitfield looked at my chicken, set her fork down with a small, precise smile, and called it serviceable. Part 2. Serviceable. I have turned that word over in my hands so many times since that night that it has lost its shape a little, the way a stone loses its edges when you carry it too long. But in the moment she said it, in the moment it landed across that dinner table with its little smile attached, I felt something I recognized. The same thing I felt at 11 years old, watching my mother beam over a paper bag of someone else's leftovers. The feeling that you are being evaluated by someone who has already decided. Connor laughed. It was short and reflexive, and he probably doesn't even remember doing it. That's the thing about his laugh in those moments. It cost him nothing because it means nothing to him. To him, it was just his mother being his mother. A little sharp around the edges, maybe, but harmless. Background noise. The weather. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of chicken. I put it in my mouth and I chewed, and I looked at the centerpiece Roberta had arranged on the table. White tulips in a low rectangular vase. Very correct, very considered. And I thought about the card in my coat pocket. I had brought it with me without fully deciding to. That's what I told myself in the car on the way over. That it was just there, that I wasn't planning anything, that I was just carrying it. The way you carry an umbrella when you're not sure about the sky. I had made that chicken 40 times. I know what good tastes like because I have made every version of it. The too dry version, the under-seasoned version, the version where the skin doesn't render right because the oven temperature was off. I have made every mistake and corrected every one. My daughter asks for it by name. She is 4 years old and she calls it Mommy's Special Chicken, and she chases the last pieces around her plate with her fingers when she thinks I'm not looking. But I was at Roberta Whitfield's table, so it was serviceable. After dinner, Connor and Gerald moved to the kitchen with the plates, and Roberta began the ritual of covering the remaining food and locating containers in her very organized cabinets, and I stepped into the hallway with my phone to return a text from the babysitter about pickup timing. That's when Paulette drifted out after me, wine glass in hand, doing that thing she does where she's not obviously following you, but she is absolutely following you. She stopped beside me and kept her voice low. "I'm sorry about the culinary background thing," she said. "How did you hear it from across the table?" "I always hear it," she said. And then, quietly, "She does it to everyone she considers—" And she stopped herself. "Considers what?" I said. Paulette looked at her wine. "Not the right fit." I've thought about those words a lot since then, too. Not the right fit. 6 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and birthday parties, and a grandchild Roberta genuinely adores. And I am still in the internal accounting of that household. Not the right fit. "She's been saying versions of it for 6 years, I said. "I know. Connor doesn't hear it." "I know that too," Paulette said. And there was something in the way she said it. Not an excuse, not a defense of him, just an acknowledgement of a thing we had both been carrying separately without ever putting it on the table between us. "I want to ask you something right now, and I want you to really sit with it. Have you ever been made to feel like an outsider in a family that was technically yours? Not violently, not obviously, but in the accumulated weight of small moments, of jokes at your expense, of laughter that you were never quite inside of. If that's a room you know, leave it in the comments. Tell me about it. Because I think that kind of quiet exclusion is one of the loneliest things a person can experience, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I read every single comment, every one. Because here's the thing about that kind of treatment. The thing that makes it so hard to name, to defend yourself against, to even explain to the person who loves you and happens to share DNA with the people doing it. It's deniable. It always has an out. It was just a joke. She was just being funny. You're too sensitive. And the person saying those things to you, the one minimizing it, doesn't always mean harm. Sometimes they just genuinely cannot see it. Connor grew up inside those jokes. They were the air in that house. You don't notice air. That's what I was thinking about in that hallway, Paulette's wine glass catching the light from the wall sconce, the sound of Gerald saying something to Connor in the kitchen, and Connor laughing again. A different laugh this time, a real one. The laugh he only has with his father, open and unguarded in a way that makes me love him and grieve a little at the same time. And then Roberta's voice from the dining room, bright and carrying, talking to Maeve, who had wandered back in, saying something about how perhaps next time they'd make a proper roasted chicken with a good wine sauce. Next time. That was the thing. Not the insult, which I had absorbed and filed. The next time. The assumption of continuity. That I would keep coming to this table, that this would keep going, that I would sit across from her at the next dinner, and the one after that, and absorb whatever she said and smile, and bring my daughter and my cooking, and my not quite right fit self, and that nothing would ever change, because nothing ever needed to. I put my phone in my pocket. I walked back into the dining room. I stood at the edge of the table. I didn't sit down. I waited until Roberta looked up from where she was reaching across to retrieve a serving spoon, and when she met my eyes, there was a half-second where she registered that something was different. Something in my face, in the quality of my stillness, and she straightened. "Roberta," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." I reached into my coat pocket. I placed the index card on the table, face up, between the white tulips and the bread basket. Do you know who Sandra Pruitt is? The room made a sound by going silent. That's the only way I can describe it. The silence had a texture, a weight, like pressure dropping before a storm. Gerald came out of the kitchen first. He saw the card before he could rearrange his face. And what I watched happen in his expression in that half second was not guilt, exactly. It was the particular collapse of a man who has been running a very long relay race and has just dropped the baton in front of everyone. He stood in the doorway and did not move. Roberta looked at the card, then at Gerald, then back at the card. The sound she made was not a word. It was structural, the sound of something load-bearing giving way. Connor appeared behind Gerald and he said, "Delia, what?" with a space in the middle of the sentence where his voice went somewhere else. I kept my eyes on Roberta. "I found a text thread on Gerald's tablet 4 months ago," I said, and my voice was level. I had not planned for it to be level. It just was. The way your hands are steady sometimes, even when everything else isn't. I have been thinking since then about what to do with it. I want you to know that I had no intention of bringing it here tonight. I picked up the index card. I put it back in my coat pocket. You can talk to Gerald about what I found, or not. That's your marriage. I'm going to take my daughter home now. I walked into the dining room where Maeve was sitting on the floor with a picture book she had found in Roberta's shelf of things kept for grandchildren. I crouched down. I helped her put on her shoes, the little navy ones with the Velcro straps that she can almost do herself. I picked up her coat. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I heard Connor behind me, heard him say my name again, and I said, without turning around, "I'll meet you at the car." And I walked out. The drive home was the quietest 40 minutes I have ever spent with another person. Maeve fell asleep 7 minutes out of Brentwood, the way she always does in the car after 8 o'clock. Instantly, completely, her head dropping to the side and her mouth going a little slack. I watched her in the mirror for a moment. Then I looked back at the road. Connor drove. His hands were at 10 and 2 on the wheel, which is not how he normally drives. He normally has one hand at the bottom, relaxed, the way a man drives when he's confident in the road. 10 and 2 meant he was holding on to something. He asked, once, "How long have you known?" 4 months, I said. A long pause, the highway lights strobing through the windshield. "And you didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" I looked out at the road. I thought about how to say what was true without saying more than was true. "Because I wasn't sure it was my truth to tell," I said. "And then your mother called my cooking serviceable, and I understood something." "What did you understand?" "That I had been protecting people who weren't protecting me." He didn't say anything after that. Not for the rest of the drive. I didn't try to fill it. Some silences need to be sat in, and I had waited long enough to say what needed saying. I could wait a little longer for whatever came next. I unbuckled Maeve from her car seat. She half woke, wrapped her arms around my neck on instinct, and was asleep again before I got her through the front door. I carried her upstairs. I laid her down. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment longer than I needed to, listening to her breathe. Then I went to the kitchen, got out the flour and the salt and the yeast, and I started to make bread. Not because I was hungry, not because I was calm, because my hands needed something real to hold on to, and dough is about the most honest thing I know. Connor apologized that night. Not in a big way, not with words even. He came downstairs around midnight and found me at the kitchen table with the bread dough resting under a cloth, and he just sat down across from me and put both his hands flat on the table between us, like he was offering them. We sat there for a while without talking. And then he said, quietly, "I didn't hear it. I really didn't hear it." "I know," I said. "That's not an excuse." "I know that too." It wasn't a resolution. It was the beginning of one, which is a completely different thing. Slower, less satisfying in the moment, but more real. We went to bed without solving anything, which felt, strangely, like the most honest thing we had done together in a while. 3 days passed. I went to work. I made Maeve's lunches and took her to her program and came home and cooked dinner and did the ordinary maintenance of a life that does not pause for your interior weather. Connor was quieter than usual, but present in a way he sometimes wasn't. He put his phone down at dinner, which he doesn't always do, and he asked Maeve questions about her day and actually listened to the answers instead of half listening while composing a response to an email. On the third evening, his phone rang after dinner. He looked at the screen and then at me, and I said, "Go ahead," and he took it into the other room. I could hear the low register of his voice, but not the words. He was on for 47 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when he went in, and I looked again when he came out. He sat back down at the kitchen table. I was still there, with a cup of tea I had mostly forgotten to drink. "She confronted him," he said. I nodded. He confirmed it. Apparently without much, he paused, choosing the word, resistance. "How long?" I asked. 4 years. 4 years. Gerald Whitfield had been conducting a 4-year affair while sitting at the head of that dinner table and refilling everyone's wine and laughing at his own stories. And Roberta had been, what, not knowing? Knowing and not knowing? Building her perfect, immaculate life on a foundation she had decided not to examine too closely? "She said they're going to do counseling," Connor said. "He's in the guest room." "Okay," I said. "She also said—" He stopped. "What?" He looked at the table. "She said she hopes you understand that this is a private family matter." I picked up my tea. It was cold. "We can talk about the irony of that another time," I said, and he made a sound that was almost a laugh, short and complicated and a little broken around the edges. It was Paulette who said the thing that actually moved through me. She texted at 11:42 that night. I was already in bed, not sleeping, watching the ceiling do nothing. My phone lit up on the nightstand and I picked it up and read, "I watched my mother's face when she read that name." She knew, Dell. She didn't know the name, but she knew something. "She's been building a house on a crack for years. You didn't break anything that wasn't already breaking." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand, and I lay there in the dark and I felt something I was not entirely prepared for. Not vindication, not relief, but grief. A specific, quiet grief for a woman I did not particularly like, who had spent 39 years arranging her life into something beautiful and correct and load-bearing, and who was now going to have to look at what was underneath. I didn't cause that. I want to be precise about this. Gerald Whitfield caused that. He caused it 4 years ago, and he caused it every day he chose not to stop. I was just the person who happened to be in the room when the load-bearing thing decided it had held long enough. But I had made a choice too, and choices have weight, even the right ones, maybe especially the right ones. If you've ever done something that was completely justified and still felt complicated sitting with it afterward, if you've ever been right about something and found that being right wasn't the simple, clean feeling you thought it would be, I need you to hit that like button right now. Because this is the part nobody talks about. The part after the moment. The part where you're in your car or your kitchen or your bed, and you did the thing, and now you have to live inside what the thing made. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because I'm not done, and where this goes from here, I didn't expect any of it. I want to talk about Roberta for a moment. Not to excuse her, not to redeem her, but because she has been living in my head since that night in a way that surprised me, and I think it matters to the story. Roberta Whitfield grew up in a house where appearances were the primary currency, where the right china and the right posture and the right kind of dinner party were not vanity, they were survival. She married a man who came from less than she did and built more than her family expected, and she made a life that looked exactly like the life she had been taught to want. She raised 2 children. She maintained a beautiful home. She was, by every external measure, successful at the thing she had been trained to do. And she used the dinner table as the place where that success was performed and protected. I understand that now. When she made her comments about my cooking, about my background, about the Montessori program, she was not being cruel for sport. She was managing what she experienced as a standard that my presence, my ordinary East Knoxville, working class, state school, carry your own bags presence somehow threatened. I was the paper bag of leftovers she had not left out on purpose. I was the reminder that the world outside her kitchen was not organized the way she needed it to be. That doesn't make it okay, but it makes her human, and I have found, slowly, that I needed her to be human in order to put down the weight of her. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That's the thing about real life that is nothing like the way we talk about real life. The actual reckoning happens in small increments, in ordinary rooms, in Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings, and the way someone makes your coffee and whether they ask how you slept. Connor asked how I slept. More often than before, and with more attention to the answer. He called his mother on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the dinner, and I was in the next room folding laundry and not trying to listen but listening anyway. I heard him say her name. I heard him say, evenly and without raising his voice, that a comment she had made about me, he used the word me, not Delia, me, the possessive, was not acceptable. That he expected it not to happen again. There was a pause. Then his voice again, still even. I know, Mom, I love you too. I'll talk to you Sunday. He came into the laundry room and didn't say anything about the call. He just picked up the other end of a fitted sheet and held it out to help me fold it, which is something he has never voluntarily done before in our entire marriage. I took my end of the sheet. We folded it. I need to tell you about the grocery delivery because it is the most Roberta Whitfield thing that has ever happened, and I mean that with something very close to affection. 10 days after the dinner, a delivery arrived at our door. A large one, the expensive kind, from a specialty grocery, with the kind of ingredients that come wrapped in tissue paper. Good flour, European butter, a whole vanilla bean in a glass tube, several cuts of meat, 2 bottles of wine. No note. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at all of it laid out on the counter and I thought about what it cost her to do that. Not financially, though it was expensive, but personally. To make a gesture of acknowledgement without making an apology. To extend something without lowering herself to words. That delivery was the closest thing to "I heard you" that Roberta Whitfield's entire emotional architecture was capable of producing. I accepted it without comment. I put everything away carefully, and then I used some of the flour to make bread. Not to prove anything, not as a statement. I made bread because I was overwhelmed, and that's what I do when I'm overwhelmed. I find something real to hold on to with my hands. I made a good loaf. I ate it warm with the European butter, standing at my kitchen counter at 3 in the afternoon while Maeve was napping, and it was one of the best things I have eaten in recent memory. My mother taught me to make bread. She learned from her mother, who learned from hers, in kitchens nothing like Roberta Whitfield's kitchen, using flour that didn't come wrapped in tissue paper. When I thought about that, standing there at my counter, bread warm in my hands, something settled in my chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Not everything, not all at once, but something. Something that felt, underneath the grief and the complexity and the tiredness of the whole long thing, like the beginning of being exactly where I was supposed to be. The consequences for Gerald Whitfield arrived the way consequences usually arrive for men like Gerald Whitfield. Not all at once, not dramatically, but through the slow erosion of a reputation built on other people's goodwill. I didn't cause any of it. I want to be clear about that. I said a name at a dinner table, and then I went home and made bread and went to sleep. And everything that happened after that happened because of choices Gerald had made over 4 years, and choices Roberta made in the weeks that followed, and the natural physics of a small community that has known a family long enough to have opinions about them. It was Paulette who kept me informed, in the specific way she has of texting, brief, dry, precise, the way someone talks when they've been the observer in a room their whole life and have developed an economy of language around it. The first text came about 2 weeks after the dinner. Dad told the golf guys he and Mom are working through some things. Gary Hendricks apparently told his wife. You can imagine the rest. I could imagine the rest. The particular speed of information in communities like the one the Whitfields moved in, where everyone has known everyone for 30 years and social standing is maintained through the performance of stability, is something I had observed from the outside for 6 years. I had never been inside it. I had always been, at those functions and dinners and neighborhood gatherings, slightly adjacent to it. The daughter-in-law from East Knoxville, Connor's wife. Serviceable. The second text from Paulette, a week after that. Mom canceled the Hendersons' dinner party. First time in 11 years she's canceled anything. People are asking questions. And then, a few days later, the one that sat with me the longest. I think she told Aunt Carol. Which means everyone knows by end of week. She always tells Aunt Carol when she needs everyone to know something without having said it herself. I put my phone down after that one, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store for a while. Not because I felt triumphant, because I felt the specific weight of what it means when a woman's life, The particular life Roberta had constructed, with such precision and such effort over 4 decades, becomes a subject of other people's dinner conversations. Whatever I thought of Roberta Whitfield, she was a person, and this was her life. Gerald, according to Paulette, had moved back into the bedroom after 6 weeks. The counseling was continuing. Whether the marriage would hold was not something Paulette speculated about, and I didn't ask. It wasn't mine to track. About a month after the dinner, Paulette drove up from Chattanooga on a Saturday and appeared at my door with coffee from the good place 2 blocks over, the one that takes 12 minutes to make anything and is completely worth it. She handed me a cup and said, "I'm not here for a reason, I just wanted to be here." And I believed her. And we sat on my back porch in the thin November light and talked about everything except the dinner for almost 2 hours. At some point, she said, "I've been watching my mother treat you like a guest in our family for 6 years, and I never said anything to her. I want you to know I'm sorry about that." I looked at her. She was turning her coffee cup in both hands the way she does when she's said something she meant, and is waiting to find out if it landed. "You saw it," I said. "That mattered, even when you didn't say anything." "It's not enough," she said. "No," I said, "but it's something." We sat with that for a while. The yard was doing the November thing where all the color has left it, but it hasn't become bleak yet. It was just quiet and brown and honest about what it was. Connor's reconciliation with me was slower and more interior than Paulette's, but it was real. He is not a man who processes quickly or out loud, and I have made a kind of peace with that, the same way I've made peace with the fact that I process everything internally until it reaches a pressure I can no longer contain, and then I place an index card on someone's dinner table. We are, each of us, our own specific kind of complicated. What changed in him was visible in the accumulation. The phone at dinner, the sheet folding, the call to his mother. A Saturday when he took Maeve to the park without being asked, and came back 2 hours later saying they'd gotten ice cream, even though it was November and Maeve had chocolate on her jacket, and he was carrying her on his shoulders, and she was asleep up there, just fully asleep on his shoulders, and he was walking so carefully so as not to wake her, and I stood in the doorway and watched them come up the front walk, and felt something large and warm move through my chest. He is trying. That is the most honest thing I can say about my husband. He is trying in ways he was not trying before, and I believe that the trying is real, and I am choosing to be in this marriage with my whole self, rather than the carefully edited version I had been offering for longer than I want to admit. I wrote a letter to Roberta. Not immediately. It took me almost 2 months to know what I wanted to say, and another 2 weeks to say it without it being about winning or explaining or defending. What I wrote was short. I told her that I had not brought that card to dinner to hurt her. I told her that I had been sitting on it for 4 months because I understood that the damage would be wide and I did not want to be the person who caused it. I told her that what changed my mind was not the chicken, it was the word serviceable, and specifically the assumption embedded in it, that there would be a next time, that this would continue, that I would keep absorbing the small, precise diminishments and nobody would ever have to reckon with them. I told her that I did not need her to like me. I had stopped needing that some time ago. But I did need her to understand that I was not a guest in her son's life. I was not temporary, not inadequate, not an inconvenient presence that Connor had inexplicably chosen. I was his wife. I was Maeve's mother. I was a woman who had built her life with her own hands and who was, in every way that actually mattered, exactly enough. And then I wrote the line that took me the longest to find, the one I rewrote 6 times before I understood what I was trying to say. I think you have been so focused on protecting the life you built that you forgot to notice the people living inside it. I showed it to Connor before I sent it. He read it slowly, the way he reads things when he's actually reading them and not skimming. Then he handed it back and said, "Send it." "You're not going to tell me it's too much?" He shook his head. "It's exactly enough," he said. And that, those 3 words, said quietly in our kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday evening, said about a letter and also, I understood, about everything else, that was the moment I knew we were going to be okay. Roberta never wrote back. I did not expect her to. What arrived, about 3 weeks later, was a handwritten recipe card in an envelope, her handwriting, precise and upright, in blue ink. A wine sauce. For roasted chicken. No note, just the recipe. I stood in my kitchen holding it for a long time. Then I put it in the drawer where I keep the recipes I actually use, between my mother's bread and a soup I've been making since college, and I close the drawer. That's as close to an ending as the Roberta Whitfield chapter of my life is going to get. I have made my peace with that. There is a version of this story where she apologizes clearly and completely and something is restored, and that is a satisfying version. But it is not the true version. The true version is a recipe card in an envelope and a drawer where it lives now between the things that matter to me, and a choice I make every day to accept the gesture for what it is, rather than grieve it for what it isn't. There is an ordinary Tuesday in November that I keep coming back to. About 6 weeks after the dinner, Connor was traveling for work, Maeve was in bed, and I was in the kitchen alone making soup. The one I've been making since college, the one that costs almost nothing and fills the whole house with a smell like warmth. I was thinking about my mother, about that Thursday when she brought home the paper bag, about how she smiled at it. And I was thinking, for the first time, with some gentleness toward the thought, that maybe I had misread her a little. Maybe she was not smiling at the scraps. Maybe she was smiling because she was bringing something home, because she had found a way to give us something beautiful, even inside a situation that was not beautiful. Maybe the smile was not gratitude for the condescension. Maybe it was just love, in the form available to her, in the kitchen available to her, on a Thursday that was like every other Thursday. I stood at my stove and I thought, I have been cooking my whole life the way she taught me, in the kitchens available to me, with what I have, making it into something that fills the house with warmth. And no one gets to call that serviceable. Not anymore. My name is Delia Marsh. I am 34 years old, and I finally understand the difference between being grateful for scraps and knowing the full value of what you made. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it for a second. Has someone ever quietly dismissed something you were genuinely proud of? Not with cruelty, but with that particular brand of politeness that somehow lands worse than cruelty would? And did you say something? Or did you carry it home in the car and fold it away somewhere inside you, and tell yourself it didn't matter? Leave it in the comments. Tell me what it was, or tell me what you wish you had said, or tell me what you eventually did say. Because I think there are a lot of people watching this who have been sitting on their own version of that index card, and I think they need to know they are not alone in it. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt like something you have lived or are living right now, hit like on this video. Subscribe so you're here for the next one, because I have more stories and I am done being quiet about them. And if you know someone who has been made to feel like a guest in a life that is completely and entirely theirs, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing that someone else has sat at that table and chosen, eventually, to stand up. I'll see you in the next one.